Welcome to the Nurse Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Garvin Mayo, and I have my co-pilot here with me, Michelle Renee. And today we are going to talk about mental health and racism in nursing. This is a continuation from an episode I did a couple of weeks ago, asking the question, does racism still exist in nursing? So I'm excited to hear Michelle's point of view. And then really how, racism in nursing or any type of bias or what's the word I'm looking for? Discrimination, can be a source of stress that leads to mental health. So Michelle, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners who they should know you because you've been here so many times, but introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, I'm Michelle Renee. I am an acute care nurse practitioner, and I also am the owner of Graceful Power Yoga and Wellness. I am a fertility and women's health coach.
And she also, she kind of said it, but she is a master yogi, right? I guess you call yourself yogis, and breathwork specialist. And she actually joined the Stress Blueprint. So she is my partner in crime in terms of helping the Stress Blueprint clients with yoga and breathwork, because those are two evidence-based practices that help reduce stress. But we'll talk about that in another episode. In this episode, we do want to get down to the topics of mental health and racism in nursing. So, Michelle, did you happen to see the survey results from the American Nurses Association talking about racism in nursing? And if you did, what are your thoughts around it?
I did. So I was just reading through the survey before I came on, and a couple of things hit me. I always knew that the numbers of BIPOC nurses were low. I just didn't realize how low they were when compared to the number of white nurses in the profession. So that was one thing that was eye-opening for me. I think another thing that I really had to ask myself, and kind of looking back over my nursing career, how much bias there is, right? How much bias showed up for me, how much I took it and kept going because that's the norm, right? That's what's expected. And then I recently had a conversation with somebody about how much you have to prove yourself that you're worthy to be at the table. And, I've been in the medical field since 1999, but I've been in the nursing profession since 2005, and just doing so much to show your worth, right? Always going that extra mile. And then wondering, why am I so stressed? And looking back and thinking about all the things that you did to prove you were worthy to be at the table. When others don't, they can't relate. They can't relate to that. So that's a little self-reflection for me going through the survey.
Yeah, and I think being a nurse in general is stressful, because I remember nursing school. Nursing school is so stressful. And in retrospect, I think about, we didn't have anything talking about stress management. We didn't have anything talking about self-care. And everyone knew that we were stressed out as nursing students. So it's kind of like a norm. And then you are launched out into the field, and being a Black nurse, it's different. At least it felt different for me. Like you said, we have to prove ourselves, we're at the table. And, one thing the survey pointed out is that racism came from not only leaders, but patients and, coworkers. So you're getting it, from different areas. And one example I used was a patient and I had an encounter where they called me the N-word, and I really didn't know how I felt about it. Even now that I'm talking to you, I still don't know how I feel about it, because I was so shocked. I never had anyone ever talk to me like that. And really going in with the intention of wanting to care for this person. And what really was the kicker is the leader, the person who was in charge was kind of like, oh, the patient's a psych patient, like that was an excuse. But it was such a missed opportunity, because even to this day, now that was years ago, it still impacts me in some way. And I think the issue with racism and stress is that we carry it, even if it's not consciously, but subconsciously. And what is it doing to us? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's very, it's troublesome, because it's something that I'm sure nurses experience every day, but who's talking about it? Have you had any experiences in your practice with racism personally?
So in doing my self-reflection, I I can remember a patient saying to me, "Oh, are you sure you're my nurse? They can't get anyone else to be my nurse." And I just brushed it off as being like, "Oh, he's just asking for a different nurse because maybe he thinks I'm too young." But it never occurred to me to think about he's asking for a nurse because of the color of my skin, until my friend went in there and he was totally different with her than he was with me. And then it hit me, oh, that's why he was asking for a different nurse earlier. So there's that, right? And then there's, so I work in a level 1 trauma center for most of my nursing career, and we see people, our patients are a mixed population, but primarily we live in a highly Hispanic and African American population. And just to hear my fellow coworkers talk about patients and what they thought about the patient and the bed, I didn't always speak up or say anything because I didn't want to be that person, but it hits you like, oh, they think that of that person who looks like me in the bed. So what do they think about me? What does this, what are they saying behind my back? Or I've had people say to my face, coworkers, well, where are you from? Well, you can't be from Springfield. You don't talk like you're from Springfield. What's that mean? So yes, I've encountered, all sides of it.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then when you do say something, it's like, oh, but not you, but not you. You
You're
know
the
what I
good-
mean? Not you. And I think, when you were telling your story, I was thinking about courageous conversations, which we talked about, last month, having courageous conversations. So really sticking up for what's right and, what's wrong. But I think as we, mature in our profession, it's a little easier to have those conversations or confront those type of situations, because you don't want to come across as confrontational, right? But at the same time, you want them to know that you're aware and it's not right. And I think that's the problem with racism, because I know they did it on racism for in a nurses, like nurses experiencing racism, but if you can be racist to a nurse, what about the patient you're taking care of?
Mhm.
Like,
Yep.
we are there to care for human beings, Black, white, purple, orange. But if you can be racist or discriminate against your coworker or the people you're leading, what about the public you're taking care of? Now
Mhm.
that's worrisome, right?
Mhm. Yep. Yep.
So it definitely becomes a problem. And something else that the survey pointed out, they showed a graph of how many, I hope I'm getting this right, how many Black students go to school for nursing. And then they had another bar graph on the side of how many graduate. And it was less than half.
Yep.
Now, what is that about?
Mhm.
What is that about? Now, that's something that definitely needs to be unpacked.
Mhm.
Because if you have all these minority nurses going to nursing school and less than half of them graduating, what is that about? And then you talk to minority nurses who've made it through the programs, right? Like me, personally, I had experiences in nursing school that were not pleasant, where I actually had to go and have courageous conversations and stick up for myself, right? Whether it's things being said in class, I know other, nursing students who came in and didn't pass and, had to go advocate for themselves and, a number of things. So I think it's something that, we need to look at. And I always just say, we're in America, we have a history here. That's why we're having this conversation. We have a history.
Yeah.
But, and another thing I found surprising is, I asked people, are their employers talking about the survey results? And a lot of people are saying no. They came up and no one's really talking about them.
So I think two things, right? Because before this, I think yesterday or the day before, I said, oh, let me go online and look up studies of racism within nursing. So not racism geared towards patients, racisms between fellow nurses. There's not much out there. So the conversation isn't being had and the conversation isn't started, right? So nobody's looking into this because this hasn't popped to the top like it's popping to the top right now, is number one. And number two, I think people are scared to start the conversation. Because if you look at top management, right, across large places, large facilities, we aren't represented there. And so how do you start the conversation without representation? Because you don't have anywhere, you don't have a reference point, and even if you say that you learned, how did you learn when you clearly haven't implemented it so that your top people look like the people who are under you?
Absolutely. And right now, in my full-time job, I do cancer research and we're talking about increasing minorities in our clinical trials. But it really starts with the company, right? So the company really has to have that. You have to have diversity at home first. And like what you're saying, at the top. So if we're talking about racism in nursing and, all your nursing leadership individuals are Caucasian, then what are we talking about? What are we doing? But I do think it's something that has to be talked about, and maybe a spotlight needs to be shined on that to say, we notice this. What are we doing about it since we're talking about diversity? Because, since everything happened with like the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, it's been magnified. Everybody wants, they want a DE&I officer. They want DE&I, webinars and lunch and learns and this and that. And I think this is an opportunity for us to start having those courageous conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, holding our leaders accountable. Really, it's really accountability to what are we doing? Because you do have minority nurses, and not just Black nurses, but nurses of all ethnic backgrounds. Right. What are you doing to make sure everyone's represented?
Right.
So
it's that you mentioned that everyone's doing this diversity and inclusion training. So I recently got a little hot under the collar because one organization that I work for, I will leave the name out, made a big push that every top management, right, should go to this diversity and inclusion training. And I was like, now you want to talk about diversity and inclusion, and pushing, you gotta go. If you don't go, it's gonna be mandatory, so you might as well go now. And I was like, this sounds like they're just want to check the box, right? I was angry. Now you want to make sure that I go to this training that I've been dealing with for my whole life, right? You didn't want to hear about this before, but now it's a big thing. And now we have to check a box. What's going to change? Is our culture going to change? And my friend pointed out to me very kindly that, yes, we're having the conversations, right? We know that this needs to be changed. And by pushing someone, maybe it will help them to realize that they need to change. And we can only hope that people aren't going to check a box. Because some people won't go if you don't force them, which is sad, but truth.
Yes, I think that is very true. A lot of organizations, Fortune 500 companies, universities, colleges, mom and pops are all doing diversity, equity, and inclusion. But, I always say, yeah, you can check the box, but for me, how are you going to make it sustainable
Mhm.
throughout the year, not just an annual training? How are you going to make it
Mhm.
sustainable? What are your thoughts on sustainability of these programs? What can some institutions do to make it sustainable?
So I think the conversation needs to keep going, right? We can't have this one-time training where we have this conversation, we make this presentation, and then we leave it without continuing the conversation. And these conversations are hard. So maybe you need a moderator, or maybe you need a facilitator to have these hard conversations, but it's visited so that people like me who are like, okay, now you're going to do this, demand of me this one-time annual training, but it stops here and it doesn't continue, so that we feel seen, heard, and understood, you know?
Yeah, that's so true. Because I've been approached to do a DE and I, presentation. I always say, so what's happening next? Because this is not a one and done thing. So
Mhm.
if you're gonna hire me to do a presentation, we need to open it up to, I need to come back. That has to be part of the deal. This one and done does not work. Or we need to do a program, a quarterly something, but it has to be sustainable. And I think also for us who are doing DE and I work, because they do look for minorities to do the presentations, right? But it's also, saying to companies that, it's not a one and done. How are we going to make it sustainable? So if you want to hire me for just a webinar, I need to come back and do something else. So I think we hold some responsibility there too, where we can hold them accountable.
Mhm. Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that?
So I think not only holding them accountable, but also giving them ideas. Like for me, um, just thinking in the population of people that I work with and the population of people that I serve, right? Um, you have certain tools and education that maybe I didn't get. So having like a wellness program where we talk about finances, or we talk about how to make or help people be more successful. Maybe we talk about how to do get the next level in their job. Maybe we help them with their resumes. Maybe, but helping to empower them so that by doing this, right, by creating these relationships, because I can come and talk at you, but if I don't form a relationship with you and get to know you and help build you up, what's the purpose of me talking at
Yes, definitely. All right, Michelle. Well, this was a great conversation. We'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you'll be back soon.
you? Thank you.